If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello, today we have Sonia interviewing John about textual criticism. This is the field of study through which we can know the original text of the New Testament. We are continuing from the previous episode today.
What do evangelicals say about these papyri? James White, for example, in the King James Only Controversy, page 152, says, every one of the papyrus manuscripts we have discovered has been a representative of the Alexandrian, not the Byzantine text type. Daniel Wallace in Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society, 1994, says every text type is apparently found in the papyri except the Byzantine. So you see, here's proof. These are even earlier, a lot earlier than Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, and yet, you see, the Byzantine is not there. They're Alexandrian. That proves the Byzantine is secondary. Okay? Now, what you would expect, if the mainstream textual criticism was right about the Byzantine being secondary, then you should find that the text in these earliest manuscripts was all Alexandrian, as is claimed by James White. What was found is the text was a mix of all different types. You couldn't look at the text in one manuscript and really classify it according to these supposedly traditional text types. They were mixed texts. Wilbur Pickering in The Identity of the New Testament Text writes this: rather than lining up in clear streams or text types, the earliest manuscripts are dotted helter-skelter over a wide spectrum of variation. Philip Comfort, Early Manuscripts and Modern Translations of the New Testament, says, for example, P66 is not fully Alexandrian, nor fully Western, nor fully Byzantine. Scholars are hard-pressed to give P66 a fitting label. If you look at P66, P75, for example, P66 agrees on variant readings, and this is from a study by another scholar named A.F.J. Klein, a survey of the researches into the Western text of the Gospel and Acts, augmented by Pickering. P66, in its variant readings, agrees with Codex Sinaiticus 14 times, but with Codex Vaticanus 29 times. Okay? So they're contradicting each other here, but agrees with the Byzantine text type, the Textus Receptus, 33 times. So who's going to say that P66, how can you say that it's Alexandrian when it agrees more often with the Byzantine than it does with the Alexandrian?
Well, they add both the agreement with Sinaiticus and Vaticanus together.
Then you have a bit of a problem because Vaticanus and Sinaiticus contradict each other. But even if you added it together, you get 43 to 33, that's still not enough to put it into one text type. You need a minimum of 70% agreement to be in one text type. These are, as was said, they're a mix. These are mixed texts. P75 agrees 9 times with Sinaiticus, 33 times with Vaticanus, 29 times with Textus Receptus. Okay? So they do not line up with the Alexandrian text type as we're being told by people like White. They're actually mixed texts. So what was found in these papyri is very, very significant. They don't actually all line up with the Alexandrian text type as we were told. What was expected was that there should be no Byzantine readings, so-called Byzantine readings in the papyri, and especially no longer readings, because remember the rule says that the shorter reading is to be preferred. And there shouldn't be any conflate readings because these were the ones that were supposed to prove that the Byzantine text was secondary. What was found, though, amongst these papyri is at least 150 distinctively Byzantine readings, including longer readings and so-called conflate readings.
Well, couldn't someone argue that maybe there were some even earlier papyri that had the shorter readings and they were combined to make longer and conflate readings, which we find in these papyri?
They could argue that, but they wouldn't really get away with that because, remember, we're being told that the Byzantine was created in the 4th century. These papyri are a lot earlier than that. So if those readings that we were told were invented for the Byzantine text type in the 4th century are actually there a century or 2 centuries earlier, then they could not have been created for the Byzantine text and cannot be used as evidence that the Byzantine text is later or secondary. These 150 distinctive Byzantine readings, by the way, are published in Harry Sturtz's book that was based on his dissertation. The book is called The Byzantine Text Type and New Testament Textual Criticism. So he lists 150. There may well be more.
What makes them significantly Byzantine?
Well, this is claims of the textual critics. Text types are defined by certain distinctive readings, and there are some that they will say is, well, this is distinctively Byzantine. For example, the conflate reading that we looked at last time in Luke 24:53. They were in the temple praising and blessing God. This, we were told, was a reading created by putting together the original reading praising God, combining it with a later error blessing God, and then creating this conflate reading. And that would be distinctively Byzantine because it was invented by Lucian or whoever was putting together the Byzantine text. So that's what they mean by distinctively Byzantine. These were readings that are only found in the Byzantine manuscripts and therefore are secondary. To drive the point home, there's a dissertation written by a fellow called Matthew Stutz, his Doctor of Theology dissertation, where he did what textual critics often say is that really we should be comparing representative manuscripts of each text type, not the artificially created critical texts, but actual pick representatives of the Alexandrian text type and of the Byzantine and do the comparison based on that. So what Stutz did is he took the Codex Sinaiticus as a distinctively Alexandrian text manuscript and Codex Basilensis from the 8th century, which is supposed to be a very good representative of the Byzantine text. Then he took the 5 earliest papyri of the Gospel according to Matthew, P77 and P45, which both are dated to around the year 150, P64, which is dated to around the year 200, P1, which is from the 3rd century, and P70, which is also from the 3rd century. Any manuscript that's a papyrus, they designate it as P. The P stands for papyrus. And they're numbered basically in the order in which they were found. So what happened when he compared these 5 earliest papyri of Matthew to Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Basilensis? P77 agreed with Codex Sinaiticus in all variants 87.6% of the times, but with Codex Basilensis 91.2% of the times. In what he deemed significant variants, the agreement with Sinaiticus was 97.3%, but Codex Basilensis, it was 98.2%. For P45, Codex Sinaiticus agreed 84.8% of the times, Codex Basilensis 89.3% of the times. And the list goes on like that. When you compare these 5 earliest papyri of the Gospel according to Matthew from between the 2nd and 3rd centuries, compare it to Sinaiticus and Basilensis, a representative Alexandrian manuscript, a representative Byzantine manuscript, 4 times out of 5, the Byzantine agrees with the papyri more than the Alexandrian does. Now that's exactly the opposite of what we're supposed to find. It's the exact opposite of what people like James White said when he claimed that all of the papyri were Alexandrian. In fact, the papyri are closer to Byzantine when they are compared fairly.
Yeah, when you state those percentages, it doesn't sound like a very significant difference. If Sinaiticus is such a terrible manuscript, how can any good manuscript even agree with it in that high a percentage of the times for the variants?
Well, he's comparing these supposedly different variants. A lot of the mistakes in Codex Sinaiticus, and we read out what these kind of mistakes are. They just make a hash of the text. They're not even included in his comparison here. He's looking only at what are considered to be significant differences between the Alexandrian and the Byzantine. He's not looking at the whole mess that you get in Sinaiticus. I think it's Sinaiticus, for example, that takes the incident where, in the Gospel according to John, where a Roman soldier thrusts the spear into Jesus' dead body and water and blood come out, proving that Jesus was dead. The scribe of Sinaiticus actually took this, which is in John, and inserted it into, I think it's Luke, and he did it before Jesus actually died on the cross. So there are these nonsensical readings in Sinaiticus and in Vaticanus that aren't even taken into consideration for this type of comparison about which we're talking now. But it's certainly a good question. Now, again, remember that our scholars tell us that these papyri were Alexandrian. It's not really true, though. The texts found in these early papyri did not neatly align with the Alexandrian, Byzantine, or Western text type, but they were described as mixed texts, because here on this part they agree with Byzantine, this part they agree with Alexandrian, this part they agree with the supposed Western text type, and so the textual critics called them mixed texts. But as Kurt Aland, and Kurt Aland is the doyen of 20th century New Testament textual criticism, he's the editor of the Nestle Aland Greek New Testament, which is the standard critical edition on which almost all of our modern translations are based, so he is the expert. Aland pointed out text types cannot be mixed before they exist. In other words, you have to have a distinctively Byzantine and a distinctively Alexandrian before you can mix the two. But these so-called mixed texts come before the dates at which these supposedly were created.
Well, why can't they just be considered as the precursors from which the current text types came from? Because if they eventually divide into those three, they must have come from some other source that would have been a mix, right?
Or the fact that there's so many differences, for example, between Sinaiticus and Vaticanus would suggest that the idea of text type in the first place was not a good idea. But let's listen to Aland tell us this. He writes, "It is impossible to speak of mixed texts before recensions have been made."
What's a recension again?
That's the edition where the editor works to create the archetype of the Byzantine text, the archetype of the Alexandrian, and so on. None of them are thought to go back all the way to the original. They were recensions or editions prepared at some point subsequent to the original creation. So he says, it is impossible to speak of mixed texts before recensions have been made. They can only follow them. Whereas the New Testament manuscripts of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, which have a mixed text, clearly existed before recensions were made. The simple fact that all these papyri with their various distinctive characteristics did exist side by side in the same ecclesiastical province is the best argument against the existence of any text types, including the Alexandrian and the Byzantine. We still live in the world of Westcott and Hort with our conception of different recensions and text types. We can no longer take their conception as valid. And that's what Aland said. And Aland is, as I said, he was probably the world's greatest expert of the 20th century on this.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but please join us for the next part tomorrow. Same time and same place. Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, and YouTube. Simply search Truth in My Days as one word. Again, Truth in My Days as one word, no spaces in between. And you can connect with us. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.